welcome to our interview today. What is your name?
I'm Deborah Ethridge Sutton.
And what were your years of service and your positions with Braniff?
I joined Braniff in early 1976, and I left Braniff in March of 84.
And that
40
was
years ago.
Wow. And that was with Braniff too, Braniff Inc., right?
Right. I stayed through the bankruptcy, saw the new airline get up in the air, and then felt it was time as the last of the old corporate officer team still on board. It was time to move on.
Sure. Totally understand that. Now, where did you go after that?
I actually went to work for the former CFO of Braniff, Steve Turoff, who was toward the end years of Braniff. He'd gone to work for a wealthy Dallas family, and they had several entities that were looking at bankruptcy situations, and I had unfortunately developed some legal bankruptcy expertise through the Braniff days, and so I joined Steve Turoff.
Okay, well that's fantastic. So did you stay with that for many years, or?
I was with them for probably about 4 years. Actually, I married the husband that I met through Braniff. He'd been with one of Braniff's lenders. We met on a business trip to Chicago, and a couple of years after that we had a little one, and I took a few-year break in my legal career at that point.
I see. Well, that's a great story. And now you advise the foundation today, so you're still associated with Braniff.
I am so excited about the foundation, and the work you're doing is so impressive and so awesome, and preserving this history is just such a gift to me, because the memories are so great, and to know that it is living on is fantastic. So thank you so much for all your work.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you as well, and thank you for those kind comments. Do you remember your first flight? Not necessarily on Braniff, but when did you first fly?
Oh my goodness. So I was very small, and it was would have been a flight from Dallas to Birmingham with my mother, where we had family. We'd been going by train, but finally made the first air. Would have been my first.
Well, do you remember what airline it was?
I don't.
Yeah,
It'd be interesting to see what Braniff's years were flying to Birmingham, because
it was just 1979 and 80.
Okay, then it was certainly wasn't Braniff.
Right, that was one of the dormant routes that initially did really well, and then the fuel costs got it.
But I did have fun. I still remember when we were setting up the flights to Alabama. And part of my job doing the corporate legal stuff was working with the Secretary of State's office, getting our authorization to do business, et cetera, and of course the heavy Southern accents in Birmingham or anywhere in Alabama were such that I could roll back into my good Alabama roots accent and feel like we were back at home. So that was kind of fun.
So that's cool. So you're from the Alabama area.
My ancestors are Alabamians.
Okay. Now, are you a transplanted Texan, or are you native?
I was born in Midland.
Oh, okay. So you're native, just like me. We're rare.
Yeah.
Rare nowadays. Okay. So when was your first Braniff flight then?
I'm pretty certain my first Braniff flight was to Seattle for a meeting with Boeing. It was particularly memorable because this was my first real job out of law school. I clerked for the Chief Justice of the Appellate Court, one of the state appellate courts, and then came to work for Braniff. And then shortly after that, I had this business trip with one of the gentlemen from the Properties and Services Department to meet with Boeing on some contract matters. And I didn't know, in the airline business, you always plan to stay overnight if needed. So we booked the flight to go in the morning and back that night, but we weren't through with work, so we stayed over, and I learned my lesson early on. Always be prepared for overnight or two if necessary.
Welcome to the airline
Yeah.
business. Yeah, we all learned that the hard way, I think. Yeah, absolutely. What do you remember most about Braniff?
Oh my goodness. Of course, I remember how fun the industry was. Not sure it's changed so much today. It'd be interesting to know how people feel about it today, but at the time, it was an exciting, dynamic industry. And then within Braniff, what I saw was this forward-thinking, creative team of people who just thought we can do things that haven't been done, and we can do things differently. And just the people were so awesome to work with. As such a young attorney, so many of the business team were great to help train me in ways that I needed to be trained in business, and it just makes my heart smile to think back on those days and the people of Braniff at the time.
Speaking of that, what was the first time you met Harding Lawrence?
I believe that was we were at Exchange. We were still officing in Exchange Park, and the legal department was on one end of the top floor, and the Lawrence suite was at the other end. There were 3 attorneys in the department when they hired me, and there wasn't room for another office, so they made, as part of the law library, they made an area there that was a little cubby that had my desk, etc. And I remember one night working late as the youngest lawyer on the team. You of course did the late night hours, and I remember Mr. Lawrence popping in and introducing himself, and we had a nice visit, and I became a fan of Harding Lawrence right away.
That's fantastic. It's interesting when you ask people about him. You know, they get down and they think about, every time I met him, he was always really nice to me. And I can't really think anything bad about him when it comes to, when you meet him face to face like that.
I think one of his gifts, in all honesty, was I've seen him be also really, really, really tough, because he could be, but he had a gift for reading people and what was going to motivate them. And for so many people, we're motivated by somebody encouraging us and being nice to us, but there are a few people who respond better to a more firm approach of management, and he could go from one to the other very quickly, if appropriate.
Very true.
In my opinion.
Very true. That's fantastic. Let's see. Okay, so who were some of the members of management, since you worked with management and colleagues, that you admired and liked there at Braniff?
Well, the legal department team was just terrific. Jim Riley was general counsel. Alan Stewart was VP and handled a lot of the financial side, the legal financial affairs. And then Jay Jackson, when I joined, was the corporate secretary, and as he was approaching retirement, he really trained me to take over that role, which was the more corporate, working with the board, doing the securities work, etc. And they all could not have been better, to a very young attorney, also a very young female attorney. And I definitely want to mention that this was a time in our country and in Texas when the major big law firms in Dallas weren't hiring women yet. It was difficult to make inroads for females in a lot of business situations. So that they gave this young female attorney a chance was incredible. But I think this same attitude about giving women opportunities and recognizing that the world was changing and this could work is also reflected on the Braniff board, which was one of the things I enjoyed most about my work from the beginning, was getting to work with the board. And at that time, very, very rare, and I'm not sure that there was even another major publicly held company that had 3 female members of the board of directors, all dynamic contributors. And again, I think that's reflective of how lucky I was to be part of a culture that was letting women start coming into and through some doors into the executive suites.
Yeah. Do you feel Braniff was a leader in that? Certainly,
I think
in industry in general. I mean,
yeah. I think the board of directors example is the premier, and that would have been at the very, very top. Those decisions are made by the CEO, obviously, who he's going to invite to be on the board. And there weren't a lot of women in the executive suite, even at Braniff when I joined. But women were coming up, and they'd proven themselves, and they were proving themselves, and were beginning to come up more rapidly. So I'm proud that Braniff was open to that.
That's fantastic. Yeah, there was actually a corporate secretary prior to you, and it was the first female that had ever served in an executive function at an airline in a corporate secretary function.
Are you sure that wasn't me?
1960s. No, there was one. I'm trying to think of Violet. No, it wasn't Violet Turnbull.
Was corporate secretary?
Yeah, assistant corporate secretary. Okay. And she was there until I believe she was there until Mr. Lawrence came, and I think she retired a couple of years after that.
Was she an attorney?
No, she was not.
Okay, so it was a little different role.
Right,
but still to be acknowledged, and I'm really delighted to know that because
I'll get her name for you too. I just went around in my head.
I'd just be really interested.
Yeah, and she was appointed by Mr. Braniff, which was a pretty big deal, and he was very much like that. Harding just continued his policies.
That makes me proud to know that, Ben.
Yeah,
it really, really does.
Very, very cool. And Paul Braniff's first assistant was Violet Turnbull. It was hired in 1929. With the company, and that was kind of unheard of back then.
Oh,
especially.
Absolutely.
I mean, she literally ran the office, did everything.
Wow.
Those two together, and starting that original company. There were about 5 of them, plus the pilots, so there weren't a lot of people to it. Shoestring operation. But yeah, I mean, Braniff has a really interesting history when it comes to even minorities. Minority hiring was, really pushed heavily after the 1960s Act, 64 Act.
As well it needed to be.
Yes. So that's really a great thing in our history that a lot of people probably don't know about. I've written about it some.
Braniff Foundation, roll.
Yeah, that's right. And I intend to write about it some more too. I've been accumulating files on what women did. We had the first female mechanics.
Well, and that pilot, your first female pilot.
Yes, Sandra Saliba Simmons. Yeah, she now lives in Arkansas. I think she's in her 80s.
Well,
now.
and you've had her involved in the foundation at something, didn't you?
I've spoken to her a few times. Her husband's health is not doing well, so she's not been able to actually come down here. We've tried to get her to come for the conference this year to take part in the pilot interview. She said, I would love to, but I just can't. But,
well, understandable. But.
Yeah. So another great person there for sure. Okay, let's see. Okay, so did you ever fly in Braniff's first Boeing 747, registered November 601 BN?
Oh, you bet. You bet.
Where did you go?
Well, so Hawaii, of course, is my primary memory. Did it ever do the London route?
It did. In fact, once they leased that second 747 from American, that went on Hawaii,
and it flipped to London. So probably
and then it inaugurated that. Yeah, because they had
of being on that one too.
They knew that plane, and they knew that it wasn't going to give trouble because now it was going from 12 hours to 18, 19, 20 something hours a day.
Oh.
So they knew that plane like the back of their hand, and that's why they did. In fact, 601 BN.
That was the hours to go over and come back?
Yes.
Okay.
Total.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So they knew that plane like the back of their hand, so they were more accustomed to putting it on that, and
That
it
makes
flew every inaugural. It flew the Pacific inaugurals.
Oh.
It flew all the Europe inaugurals. So yeah, it was absolutely. It flew the first South America inaugurals.
Oh, really?
When we started 747 service.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Well,
very.
I may have flown on it in some of those other opportunities too, but boy, I remember that first time to Hawaii. That was royal.
Something. Yeah, the service levels were just out of this world for sure. Let's see here, Deb. What was your favorite Braniff airplane?
Well, I'm a Calder girl.
Ah, there you go. Which one did you like?
Oh, Ben, don't make me pick. That's like saying which of your children is your
I know.
favorite child.
Both of them.
I love the melding of art and science, and this was the
And business.
incredible example of that. And it's so interesting about the work with Calder at the time. I find fascinating. And then, of course, as you well know, we had a lot of Calder art that we had in our offices, especially, or maybe starting with, but where I remember it is when we moved out to Braniff Place at DFW. I had a fabulous piece of Calder art in my office.
That's amazing. That is fantastic. And how popular he is today still.
Oh, yeah.
It's like leading edge.
Yeah.
Definitely, for sure. What was your... Okay, so Calder. And what did you think about Braniff Concorde service?
Well, I wish I
Did you ever
had
do
the
it?
opportunity to be on it. I did not. I was proud of it and excited about it and fascinated with what you shared with me more about the history today. But
Yeah.
that's another example of how Braniff was out there trying to look at things differently, not afraid to try something new, and then the great strategist that I feel that Harding Lawrence was, and visionary in putting things like that together and working across the pond.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely at the forefront. We were always on everyone's mind when it came to an airline. I think a lot of people thought of Braniff for sure. Did you ever meet any celebrities when you were working at Braniff?
Oh my goodness! Oh well, this may be my favorite question. Of course, I consider every member of the Braniff Board of Directors, I think, was a celebrity. But let me just mention Anne Armstrong, who had been ambassador to Great Britain prior to joining us, Pamela Harriman, who would later be ambassador to France, and then of course Mary Lasker, the incredible philanthropist. But the Braniff board were these all male and female, dynamic, business and political as well. You'll see both sides of the political world were balanced on the Braniff board. I'm sure that was Harding Lawrence's thought as well. And Harriman and Armstrong are a great example of that. Dynamites in both of the major political parties. But in addition to that, when we would open in a new city, often we would have a board event, maybe a board meeting or committee meetings in that new city, and the advance team, Harry McKillop and gang, would go in and arrange fabulous events with the city and state leaders. So I had an opportunity to work with and or be exposed to some of our governmental leaders that way. Perhaps one of my most memorable flights is the flight attendants gave me the opportunity to move seats in first class and sit by Senator John Tower for a flight to Washington, D.C., and it was memorable in a very positive way. So
Fantastic.
just one more I'll mention. The people I got to meet in business were so interesting. The part of my role was to do the legal work when we would sell our used aircraft to other carriers, and Trans-Brazil was one of our best customers, and their CEO, Omar Fontana, I believe, had been a celebrated boxer in Brazil, but was also a fabulous pianist. Just one of the most interesting, and in Brazil, very high profile leaders. So how fun to have the opportunity to meet and be exposed to. Oh, and I went at an Armstrong event once. I met George Bush before he was George Bush the governor or George Bush
the president. So George Bush.
The younger.
The younger, yes. Well, that's fantastic. Now, I believe, didn't the Armstrongs, they had a ranch out in East Texas, didn't they?
Well, not, I wouldn't, East Texas, it's more where, like the King Ranch and that kind of,
okay.
They're friends with.
Okay. That's right. I forgot about that.
Tobin Armstrong.
Now, did you ever fly on Braniff down into South America on Braniff? Did you ever?
Oh, quite a bit. Obviously, with the work with Trans Brazil, I was a regular there. The only emergency landing I've ever made in an aircraft was, I think I was actually on Varig. Had to go on a Varig flight, and we had to make an emergency landing in Manaus. But it was fascinating, and
what was the emergency?
Well, it was a mechanical. The oxygen came down, and it was startling, but
got your attention.
Has a happy ending, and turned out to be a little bit of an adventure there, seeing some of Manaus.
What is your favorite city in Latin America?
Oh,
I guess I should say South America.
Yeah, I didn't get everywhere, but I did love Quito, and our teams down in South America were just some of the most hospitable, smart, dynamic people. It was always just a delight, no matter where you were, to get to meet and get to know the local.
We did
teams.
have an amazing group of people down there. The looking at the environments that a lot of them had to operate within that were not always positive for an American carrier.
And the legal department didn't always want to know all the details,
Yeah.
I'm quite sure.
Right, yes. Very, very true. I do remember reading about that for sure. What was your favorite ad campaign?
Oh, there was just some great ones. Well, again, it is hard to pick, but what I think of first is the end of the plane.
That is just hard to beat.
Yeah.
Even today. I mean, it's just still timeless. I mean, it truly is. You could put that on an airline today, and it would still cause eyes to pop.
Yeah.
It really would.
Yeah.
It's amazing what that was. So, what was the first time you met Mary Wells Lawrence?
It would have been at one of the big board meeting events where we would celebrate, because of course she was in New York at the time, but would be in and out for activities we'd have here. But the first time I remember her was when we had the board meeting and committee meetings in England. We had our committee meetings at Leeds Castle. Oh, excuse me, they were in London. We were in London for a couple of nights. I saw my first Broadway type show, Evita, in the West End in London. And then we went out to Leeds Castle for the committee meetings, and then the whole group flew to the south of France and went to the Lawrence's beautiful place there for our actual board meeting. And she was the hostess that charmed everyone. And in fact, talking about celebrities, the party they had the evening of the board meeting, I remember included Prince Rainier came. Princess Grace was not able to come, but they evidently were regulars there. And Estee Lauder was there, which was pretty exciting to me. So.
It was an amazing home for sure. I believe it sold for like the highest price a home had ever sold for.
Wow.
Like a few years ago or something. It was like $500 or $600 million or something like that. I'm sure something has beat it now, but back then I remember.
I felt like Alice in Wonderland. It was amazing to me that I could could be part of something like that.
So the question that we all have to get to at some point is, where were you on May 12, 1982?
Well,
you were in the thick of it,
with
I think.
my role in the company, you will not be surprised I was at the office. In not good spirits, but determined that we were going to do the best we could with where we were. And there was, I think in my heart at that point, there was still some hope that we would come out of bankruptcy as the former Braniff. And of course we did come out of bankruptcy as the new Braniff. But to me it was, well, and who's to say? And maybe that's exactly what needed to be done then. But as part of the team that had worked for so long at that point through the challenging early 80s issues and trying so hard to find a way to avoid bankruptcy, it was one of the tragic days.
Mm-hmm. Were you there late, I assume, that evening and back the next day, I guess?
Yeah, I probably went home. But
now, did you go with Mr. Putnam and Phil Guthrie to Judge Flowers' home to file the bankruptcy papers? So you probably had left by that point.
I was probably back at the office. I would be pretty confident at the time that happened.
Yeah. And
of course, remember, I was a part of my responsibilities at that time were shareholder relations, and we knew what was going to happen as soon as the announcement was made, and it of course did, understandably. So that was very difficult.
Right, absolutely. So tell us about Jim Lawrence and Bob Culp. Who were they?
My two buddies. As you well know, Bob had a variety of roles in leadership at the top, working with the CAB and on the routes and regulatory work. He was just one of the best friends in the world, one of the most fun friends you could ever have. And of course, you and I mourn today because we have just lost him in recent months.
And Mrs. Lawrence too, just within less than a month of each other. Yeah.
And then Jim came in and joined the company during the time that I was there, and working with Bob Burke on all the public affairs things. And of course, then those two, they sent off to the Far East to make magic happen as we got routes and started flying there. But we were some of the younger members of the executive team at the time, and they were dear friends, and I was just proud of the skills and the determination that they brought. But I'll also always be grateful for the fun and the joy and the friendship that they brought to my life.
Absolutely.
Great people.
Do you think that Jim Lawrence was treated any differently because his father was the chairman of the company?
What an interesting question, Ben. There were people who probably looked at Jim differently because they knew that, but did he get any breaks or have an easier time? No, absolutely not. In fact, I would say my expectation is that it was more challenging for him because he had to anybody who might have had a thought like that, he had to be a little step above what everybody else to show that it was not a
hand down.
It was not because of his
free job.
Because of his relation. And I can tell you, nobody worked harder than Jim. Some may have worked as hard, but nobody worked harder or put more of their heart into the job. And what a talented young man he was.
Absolutely, and I'm sure that was difficult for him at times. But Harding Lawrence didn't give people free ride, and if you knew Harding Lawrence, you knew that Jim Lawrence was another employee, another executive.
Specifically with Harding, I think that might not be completely accurate, Ben. I think he would have been much harder on Jim.
Yes, you're exactly correct.
I don't think there's any question. I think his expectations were higher for Jim than any of the rest of us.
Yeah, I think you're exactly correct about that, Deb, for sure. Do you have anything else that you want to share about Braniff?
Oh, well, I could go on and on and on, as
we
you
can stay
well
there,
know,
for
because
sure, easily,
there are so many fun stories. But this, I just would close by saying I couldn't be more grateful for the years that I spent there. I wish it could have been longer. In my dreams, occasionally I dream about what would have happened if, but I wouldn't trade those years for anything. My only complaint is I had some other great jobs in my career after Braniff, but there couldn't have been a more fun job and industry and company and people to work with than I started with at Braniff. So I'm grateful for that. And again, I'm grateful to you and the foundation team for all the work you're doing to preserve these incredible memories of an incredible company.
Yes, and we will make sure people don't forget us one way or another.
Good.
Well, Deb, thank you so much for coming today. It's been an absolute wonderful time, as we always, whenever we visit. So
always fun to be with you too.
Thank you.
Bye.